where we're matching HR students at UNT with HR practitioners. So if you are interested in that, you can reach out to myself, you can reach out to Danielle, Kathy, Maria, any of us. We can direct you into the appropriate way to fill out the form on UNT's website to get you involved in the mentoring program so that you can be matched with an HR student. This is so important. I think all of us become faculty because we're interested in helping students and mentoring the next grouping of people who are going out into the workforce. And so if you have an interest in that at all, please reach out and let us know. You can reach out in the chat or you can send us an email. Really exciting news. We've been working really hard. Kathy has been in touch with SHRM and HRCI, and we will be able to start offering continuing education credits for your certification starting this next year. So we're really excited about that and hope that that'll be an added benefit to these networking events. As I've mentioned during some of the other events that we've done, we have opportunities for research partnerships. We have a number of faculty within UNT's college, G. Brent Ryan College of Business, that are looking at different types of research areas, whether that's retention, something that's a pretty hot topic right now as we are looking at what's been coined the Great Resignation. A lot of us are thinking about and working on COVID-related problems in the workplace, the return to the work, to offices and things like that. If you have any interest in having a faculty member and or a doctoral student come and help with data collection or anything that you're doing that could be tied into a research project or kind of a consulting project, we're basically like very cheap, free consultants. So, please feel free to reach out to us. Again, we'd love to hear what you're facing and see what we can do to try to help. Another thing that we have that's going on, you may remember if you were here with us last fall, one of the things that we were trying to put together, and Kathy did an amazing job of getting it all organized for last November, was our HR executive networking event. Obviously, COVID put a nail in that, and so we had to move it to this year. Now Delta has messed up that situation, so we are postponing it again to the spring. So be on the lookout for news about that as we try to solidify the details. We're hoping that it's going to be able to be at 60 Vines like it was going to be last year and again this year. So a really great kind of centralized location for everyone to get together. If you are an HR executive that is attending today, thank you for being here and be on the lookout for that information. If you're not, but you think that your CHRO or one of the top level executives in your organization may be interested in attending something like that, be on the lookout, and we will be sending out information closer to the date once we get everything solidified. So please feel free to share that with your colleagues. And then finally, I just wanted to touch on corporate partnership opportunities. So as I mentioned, we have several research opportunities, but one of the things that we're doing in the G. Brent Ryan College of Business is we are requiring internships for our HR majors moving forward. And so what we're hoping is that we can establish some corporate partnerships with your organization that might be interested in doing or having an intern in HR. They have to do, I think it's 240 hours within the semester. They can't just be fetching coffee. They need to be actually maybe shadowing somebody, doing things within HR that will help them to acquire some of those knowledge, skills, and abilities that they will use once they go out into the workplace and try and get a role in the HR. So if you are interested in possibly next year looking at bringing in, or sooner, bringing in an intern, please reach out to, again, Kathy, myself, Danielle, Maria, one of us, and we will be happy to get you more information on that. One final piece of business before we jump in with our keynote. We are offering a professional networking event for HR. It's going to provide registrants, for some reason that's a hard word for me to say this afternoon. It'll be an opportunity for organizations to network with students, specifically HR students who are interested in joining, who are interested in getting a job after graduation. So these are people who will be graduating in the fall or in the spring. It would also be great if you're interested in that internship opportunity, bringing on an intern. That might be something that could be a great opportunity for you to get in front of some students. This will also be a panel event. So if you're interested in sharing some HR insights and wisdom, please reach out to me if you're interested in being on a panel. We hope that you will share this information potentially with your colleagues. You can also use that QR code to register or to find out more information. All right, so we will go ahead and jump into our keynote speech. Today, we are very excited to have with us Dr. Majed Yaghi. Dr. Yaghi just recently retired from the Coca-Cola company back in April of this year after a 23-year international career. Most recently, he was the vice president of global accounts based here in Dallas and led a group of the company's chain customers across 85 different countries. His track record with CPG blue chips also includes sales and marketing stints with Kimberly-Clark, Gillette, and Warner Lambert. At Coca-Cola, he was able to lead North America channel strategy for convenience retail and has also collaborated with the National Association of Convenience Stores to create Nax Cafe, which is a knowledge transfer platform to develop food service skills of member retailers. He's also collaborated with the Emory University Business School in Atlanta, Georgia to coach their MBA teams during their annual marketing competition. Dr. Yaghi is passionate about mentoring and is the past vice chair of the International Board of Advisors for the Outreach Foundation. This is a nonprofit rehabilitating conflict, nonprofit for rehabilitating I can't read or talk today, conflict-stricken children. Sorry about that. He is also currently sitting on the International Board of Advisors of the University of Bradford School of Management, where he recently completed his Doctorate of Business Administration. And his research interests include toxic leadership, organizational culture, and commitment. And he is also currently writing a book, his second leadership book, on the toxic trigon. And we are excited to welcome him to the faculty of UNT. Starting this fall, he has just joined us as a full-time lecturer in our marketing department here in the G. Brent Ryan College of Business. So without further ado, Dr. Yaghi, please tell us more about toxic leadership. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hancock. I appreciate the introduction and giving me the opportunity to be with you today. Just to give everybody an idea of how far and how great of planners Kathy and Dr. Hancock and the team are. We started this idea of joining you today and speaking when I was at Coca-Cola way back in March. But since then, as Dr. Hancock said, I left and I joined UNT. Nurture and guide executives in the real world as it relates to building and sort of nurturing the right culture. And culture is one of those very difficult topics because a lot of people struggle with what is it? Can you have multiple cultures in an organization? Is culture this? Is culture that? Regardless of all of that, culture is more important today than probably any other time before. Probably more so because of COVID as well, because now you're having to try to maintain that organizational culture in a semi-virtual environment. So the idea of talking about culture relative to toxic leadership, which, in a nutshell, it kills any culture. And there's a reason why there has been a rise the last few decades in toxic leadership. And it's an important topic that a lot of organizations, for one reason or another, they just totally ignore it. Before I get into it, let me just give you a little bit of background about my research. Kathy, if you go to the, we'll skip this because Dr. Hancock covered it. The red are all the countries that I've been blessed to have visited. The companies that Dr. Hancock talked about are another blessing to have had the opportunity to work with such wonderful companies and also such great customers. So needless to say, I count my blessings every day because it has been a wonderful and blessed journey so far. My research, my doctorate research was a mixed method research study. So it started off as a qualitative piece where I talked to 7 C-level executives just to understand their perspective about the subject of culture, organizational performance, leadership in general, without getting into toxic leadership specifically. Coming out of all that rich content of talking to these guys, 4 themes bubbled to the top. They were invariably consistent across all these guys, and that was culture, workplace, leadership, and commitment. So I took those and I went through the second phase of my study, which is the quantitative piece, where I did a survey, and that was fielded here in the US among 342 participants. Completed my my research, presented and defended my thesis, and I was fortunate to be awarded the Dean's Award for research, innovation, and impact. I appreciate that. Thank you. So let me walk you through my key findings. And it's great that it's a small group today, so hopefully we'll have some good dialogue. And I might speed through a couple of slides just to make sure that we have time for more closer specific conversation. Next slide, please, Kathy. So I've experienced toxic leadership throughout my life, both personal and professional. And I think if each one of you thinks about it, you probably have encountered some level of toxicity throughout your life as well. A couple of things that were consistent across all those individuals that you see in the screens, which really gets to the heart of dimensionalizing what is toxic leadership. It's 2 main sort of dimensions that differentiate toxic leadership from all other types of leadership. And that's consistency of behavior, or the destructive behavior. So it was a habitual behavior that those leaders were exhibiting. And so in one dimension, it was the frequency of it. And then on the other hand, it was destructive. So the results were negative. So you couldn't have a destructive leader that is going to consistently give you positive results. There are always going to be anomalies. So yes, you might have a destructive leader who might, do something good, but on a habitual basis, their behavior drives negative results. So next slide, please, Kathy. So when you look at the academic research over the last 20 years, what is interesting, this is academic research in the field of leadership. You can see the disparity and the focus on things that are great, right? Naturally, we're human, so we're going to focus on the great stuff, right? We never want to talk about the negative stuff. But in HR context and in an organizational context, when competition is cutthroat and organizations are trying to outperform themselves every quarter, especially if they're publicly traded, you need to look at what is dragging that organization down. So the academic research outweighs the positive leadership research versus the bad leadership by a 30-to-1 margin. I mean, think about it. For every 30 articles that was published in academic journals on things like transformational leadership, servant leadership, all those great types of leadership, only 1 was about the negative side. I call toxic leadership the cancer of organizations. A lot of organizations don't realize that that cancer exists across the entire organization from top to bottom. As my research showed, even at the C-level, there is toxic behavior. And unless organizations recognize that, just like cancer, if you don't diagnose it early, it's going to have a much more dramatic and dangerous effect down the road. I'm trying to be an advocate for organizations to recognize that you do need to talk about, the 1,600-pound gorilla, right? the monstrous elephant in the room, right? You need to, just as much as organizations spend millions of dollars every year trying to develop their leaders. I was there. I've gone through probably 6 or 7 leadership experiences that cost Coca-Cola and Gillette probably an average of anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000 every time, in the hope that I end up being a great leader, right? What those companies don't do is they don't spend any money to try to diagnose or at least detect if there is toxic tendencies within their organization. And I think that's an important piece that needs to continue to be a focal point of for organizations and particularly HRMs. Next slide, please, Kathy. So let's talk about organizational commitment. You can click through the other 2 slides. So I chose organizational commitment, A, because it bubbled as one of the indicators from talking to those executives in my qualitative research, and B, because it's an important indicator. It's probably the biggest indicator of organizational performance. But when you first take a step to try to understand how commitment is defined, there are a couple of different academic tracks. So some like Majed back in 1979 and their group, they defined it from a psychological standpoint. They basically said, look, it's an attitudinal thing. If you're committed to UNT, then you're going to demonstrate behavior that reflects that commitment, right? Makes sense, kind of intuitive. But then another group came back later and defined it differently. And they said, well, actually, there are 3 different levels of commitment. And it's all based on whether it's a need, a desire, or a must. And I'll get into that in just a minute. So commitment is an important predictor of not just one, but multiple performance metrics. Your engagement, which is probably one of the biggest investments for a lot of organizations today. Okay? If an organization comes out quarterly or biannually with 60% engagement, they celebrate it. It's a big deal. The reality is, there's probably 60%, maybe 70% participation, right? So that 60% engagement is more like 40% across the entire organization. But nonetheless, leaders celebrate that engagement level because it's an indicator. It's just one way for them to get a pulse check on the organization. But also, commitment is a predictor of performance. If you have a highly committed workforce, you're definitely going to have a much higher output and a much more productive base. And then finally, of course, we're talking about commitment as an indicator of loyalty, right? If you're committed, you're loyal to the brand, you're going to stay with the company. So going back to the 3 levels of commitment, which I incorporated into my research, it says that there are 3 levels. At the very top, you have a commitment level that's called effective leadership, where there is an alignment, almost a perfect alignment or a great alignment between the individual and the organization. There is alignment in terms of values, maybe there's alignment in terms of mindset, but you have at the very top level, you have people that love the brand, they breathe it, they eat it, they sleep it because of that alignment. They see it, it's the highest level of commitment that all organizations try to get their employees to be at, because that's what drives advocacy, right? So for 23 years, I was at Coca-Cola. If you go to my house today, even after I left Coca-Cola, you won't find any blue cans of soda. You won't even find Dr. Pepper, right? You'll find a ton of Coca-Cola merchandise around the house. You find it in the kitchen. You find it in my office. You'll find it in the garage, right? If my back in the day when my girls, we have 3 girls, if they, if they were playing softball and the softball team wanted sponsorship, I went and I got them Coca-Cola sponsorship. I was probably very close at that level. The second level of commitment from the top is your normative commitment. This is when somebody feels a desire, a need to commit. A need in the sense that if I work at Coca-Cola and they send me to MBA school and they pay for my MBA, I feel a sense of obligation. I need to stay committed to this organization because I feel that I need to pay them back, right? And then at the very lowest bottom of the pyramid is continuance, which is a must. Now, you don't want a big chunk of your people to be at this level because those are the people that we call them, basically, they're using your organization as a bus stop. They're waiting for the next bus to arrive. They're going to jump on it. These are the people, it's a must for them because they feel that they don't have any other options except this particular organization. They need the salary, they need the benefits, they need whatever it is, but their commitment to the organization is not driven by anything other than the reality of a must issue. Does that make sense? All right. So next slide. I'll speed through the next one. This is sort of like just the baseline. Next slide, please. Main findings. So the first finding in my research was that toxic leadership kills commitment. Right? But at least I have scientific research to back it up. A lot of people would argue that it doesn't, but the reality is that it does. If you have a toxic leader in your organization, it's gonna affect the employee commitment. If you have a toxic leader at the very top of the organizational sphere, it's even worse. The next finding is that supportive culture is the antidote to toxic leadership. So if you want to defeat toxic leadership, or if you want to protect against toxic leadership, you want to make sure that you nurture and you build a supportive culture. What is supportive culture? Supportive culture is a people-oriented culture. It's a culture where people help each other. It's a culture where it's a nurturing culture, right? It's people-oriented, it's equitable, it's sociable, it is exactly the opposite of what you would expect from a toxic leader. So that's an important second finding. And then the third finding is that you have this toxic trigon that you want to try to avoid. You do not want to have a bureaucratic culture with a toxic leader and continuous commitment, or people that are basically in your organization just because they need the paycheck or they need the benefits. That is disaster right there. Okay. So, and that's the title of my next book that Dr. Hancock mentioned. So that's, okay, those are the 3 main findings. Let's get into the numbers a little bit more. So when you look at the correlation, you can see here, we're looking at 2 things, a toxic workplace and a toxic leader's behavior. You can see clearly that the more toxic leadership and behavior and the more toxic the workplace is, the people at the top of the commitment pyramid, those with effective commitment, are the ones that are going to be impacted negatively the most, right? And on the flip side, the people with the lowest level of commitment are almost going to celebrate the fact that you have a toxic workplace or a toxic leader, because yay, this is an opportunity for them to continue to jump on the bandwagon and do the least amount of work because they're there for the salary. Makes sense, right? All right, next slide, please. When you look at it relative to culture, I have one more slide, one more click, please. Yeah. So when you look at it in terms of culture, so there are 3 different types of culture. I mentioned the supportive culture, which is the antidote to toxic leadership. Bureaucratic culture, unlike supportive culture, is very hierarchical. It's old. It's very structured. It's procedural. It's more rigid, right? Innovative culture, sort of like a lot of times academics and social sciences associated with startup. Okay, it's very creative, very exciting, very dynamic, high risk but high reward, right? Very result oriented. So those are the three types of cultures that we talked about in this research. And we asked people to sort of like respond to the questions. There you have it. You can see it in both instances. Supportive culture does the most positive work to defend against both toxicity in the workplace and toxicity in the leader's behavior, right? You can see that at the very sort of lowest level of commitment, continuous commitment, they still somehow perform reasonably well, but the correlation is far greater with effective commitment. We're always trying to get the highest commitment level possible, which is effective commitment. Next slide, please. All right, just 2 more slides I think I have. So these are verbatims. I wanted to put them here because I wanted to give you an actual flavor for what these C-level executives said. And you can see I've got a CMO, a CPO, and a CEO. These are, okay, these are like C-level people talking about themselves being subjected to toxic behavior in the workplace. I mean, look at the CPO right in the middle, okay? They told me I wasn't supported. This is the CPO of a large media company, right, that has thousands of employees. Right? I was micromanaged even at a very high level. I would even go as far as describe it as toxic. Seems impossible, almost laughable at this level, but it was almost an abusive relationship. They were talking about their relationship with the CEO. Look at the last one. This is a CEO. He was talking about being subjected to toxic behavior from the board of directors of that small brand. So this is the bottom line. The bottom line is toxic behavior is all over the place. The question is, you as HR professionals and leaders, can you influence the organization to really put in place the right tools to make sure that you're at least trying to detect the level of toxicity in your place? And if it's high, you can work to put together programs to make sure. We're not advocating, I'm not personally advocating that you do the detection so that you try to extract these toxic leaders and throw them away. No, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a defense mechanism. See if there is toxicity in your organization. How bad is it? Right? And then defend against it. Just like you do training on diversity and inclusion, or you do training on financial acumen, do training on destructive behavior. Let it be one of your performance indicators as well, so that at least you're protecting against future destruction. One more slide, please, and then we'll open it up for questions. You can click through all of them, please, Kathy. So 5 key takeaways for you. Toxic leadership has an adverse impact on both effective and normative commitment. And those are the highest 2 levels of commitment that you want to make sure that you protect. A toxic workplace environment has negative causal relationship with commitment, meaning there is a causal relationship between your toxic workplace and commitment. If you have toxic workplace, less likely that you're going to have a highly committed people. We talked about the importance of having a supportive culture, and then toxic leadership exists at corporate boards as well. So don't think that toxicity is always from a superior to a subordinate or at the very bottom of the organizational pyramid. It exists everywhere. And then finally, the toxic trigon. This is the threesome that you want to try to avoid as much as possible. And one last slide, please. One of my favorite. Okay, words of wisdom. How you do the little things is how you do everything. Now that your challenge is, can you put the mechanisms in place to make sure that you're trying to detect those little things, because those little things, if somebody says, hey, you know what, that leader did something that I thought was very offensive or very toxic, don't take it lightly, because it could be part of a chain of events. It could be part of a habitual flavor, and you could be sitting on a toxic leader that you want to make sure that you're managing as you go. I mean, arguably, you're not gonna fire the CEO for being toxic, right? But you can recognize that they are toxic, and you can make sure that you have the right mechanisms in place to minimize their effect. Thank you very much. We can open it up for a conversation now. Wait, one more click. Wait, Kathy, one more click. You got to get the full effect of my thank you. Oh, it was supposed to do something. Oh, I was supposed to give you a heart. Thank you, though.
Sorry about that. No, I don't see that on the slide, but
all right, so thoughts, questions.
Yes, if you will put your questions in the chat for Dr. Yaghi, we will go ahead and ask him. So it's open session there. Just to kind of get us started, I do have a question for you. I don't know if you've done research. I mean, we all know COVID and how near and dear to our hearts right now, but I'm wondering if you've done any research or study on the effects of COVID. Do we feel as though toxic leadership has become more prevalent in maybe a remote type of situation? And what are your thoughts around that?
I've not published it. I have it it's ongoing right now, but I haven't seen anything published, Kathy, on the subject. I think the general consensus is that COVID has fractured organizations and probably put a pause on, especially the last year, because it was 100% virtual, right? Put a pause on a lot of the organizational and particularly cultural initiatives that companies had in place. And I know, my clients, and I had clients like Yum and Burger King and Target, that just like whatever initiatives they had, whether they were training or certain weekly and monthly routines, they just couldn't implement it because of that. So if you take that as a prevalent effect of COVID, then you would argue that, when people are not interacting regularly with each other and their coworkers, and particularly with senior leadership, that you would expect that their commitment level is going to be impacted to a large degree. Toxicity, may switch from being face-to-face to being virtual, where, a toxic leader might choose hurtful words to try to get their people to do the work. But the short answer to your question is that there hasn't been anything published that I've seen specific to toxic leadership and COVID. I'm working on a piece of research that I started with some of my colleagues in the UK that looks at that piece, but we're probably 6 to 9 months from putting something to a journal editor for review.
Thank you for that. We do have one question, actually a couple of questions. So, well, a few questions that are just rolling in. So our first one is really that employees might be worried about retaliation from a toxic leader if they report misbehavior. Does this affect the ability to identify and intervene with a toxic leader themselves?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Much like any organization, you put in place the right policies to enable people to come up and speak or report certain behavior without retaliation. But the reality is that it could happen. Now, again, if you think about a supportive culture and what sort of culture do you have, if you do have a supportive culture or even an innovative culture, that culture itself will work as a defense mechanism against any retaliation, because it's common in your organization that people will report as destructive behavior or toxic behavior. But if you're talking about a bureaucratic organization where it's very structured, and somebody might think that they're above the law and they can do whatever they want, then obviously that concern is going to be on people's mind. So I know it's going to end up being always sort of the chicken or the egg. So do you create the culture, the supportive culture, so that you're defending against toxic leadership, or do you wait until you have a problem? The reality is you have to understand what sort of culture do you have today, right? Because you can't change culture overnight. You can't just say, okay, next year for 2022, we're going to have a more friendly culture. Well, I mean, if you're not friendly to start with, it's very hard for you to become friendly overnight. So you do have to do some soul searching. You do have to understand what is your culture. As an employee, you also want to understand what is your organization's culture, because if you operate in a bureaucratic organization or bureaucratic culture, you might not want to speak up because you know that there is a higher chance of retaliation, right? I hope that answers the question.
Perfect, thank you. So Elizabeth has a question from an HR perspective. So how can HR address it if a leader is a top performer, but they're perceived as being toxic to their team? In other words, they're amazing at their job, but no one wants to work with them. How can HR address that?
I love that. I mean, that's such a wonderful question. I think McKinsey did a study a couple of years ago, that showed that I think it was like 64%, almost 2/3 of high performing vice president and above executives that they've interviewed, right, turned out to be 65%, 2/3 of the people that they interviewed above VP and above, that did not match the skill set required for VP level and higher jobs. So think about that. So basically 2/3 of the people that McKinsey interviewed, right, were essentially in the wrong place. They were VPs, and yes, they were presidents and senior VPs and whatever titles they have, but they were in the wrong place if you measure it versus the skill set needed for those positions. So what do you do as an HR manager? I think you become an advocate and a voice of reason. At the end of the day, a lot of organizations rely on HR to be a valuable business partner. Question is, I've seen organizations where HR is in the driver's seat. I've seen organizations, and they're very powerful organizations, and they're very high-performing organizations, where the CEO and the CPO are side by side. And I've seen organizations where HR just does not play a major role. So if somehow you can elevate your role as an HRM, and you can really make sure that you're more of a business partner as opposed to just a functional partner that's only there for HR, I think you'll start having much more impact. But I'll start with with raising the points and talking about, okay, we spent a lot of time and a lot of money trying to develop the right leaders. How do we make sure that those bright and future leaders don't have any negative tendencies or any dark behavior?
Absolutely. So we have another question. This is interesting perspective from a nonprofit organization perspective. So do you have any suggestions for a director of a nonprofit who is dealing with a toxic leadership on their board of directors? How can somebody cope in this type of behavior, if that doesn't put their job in peril?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Having spent time with two nonprofit organizations, yeah, they do exist out there. You have to minimize their role and their impact. You want the voice of reason. You want the positive leadership to outweigh the negative behavior. So, making sure that they're not necessarily in powerful positions. If the organization has certain committees, you want to make sure that they're not taking leadership positions in important different committees. You want to minimize their role as much as possible while being respectful. You want the majority to be on your side. So how do you lobby the majority to be on your side so that, you know, when you have to vote, okay, their vote is not that significant? Or if they displayed certain bad behavior and you talk to the majority can see the destructiveness of that particular behavior, and collectively they can take the right action. So you have to be an advocate for positivity by making sure that you recruit other board members to be on your side against them.
Perfect. Keep your questions coming in. Our last one that we have right now, it is from Elizabeth. Elizabeth, I feel this question. I had this situation numerous times, and it's really the after effects of a toxic leader. So if you've had a CEO who was a toxic leader leave the organization and the employees are still hesitant to trust in new leadership and their intentions, do you have any advice about addressing these concerns with those employees?
Yeah, I mean, that's why that quote is one of my favorite. How you do the little things is how you do the big things. So if you're the leader who just came in, you have to let your action speak for yourself. I think it was Tony Bridwell who in one of my conversations with him, and I think he also said it during his last speech to you guys. He said, stories is a powerful thing, right? Stories are based on experiences. If all of a sudden you as the incoming leader start showing up at the right time in the right context, and people are talking about the great experience that they're having with you, the great initiatives, the great behavior, it empowers the rest of the organization. All of a sudden, it just opens up the organization, because all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, it's okay to walk around if I'm a VP, okay, and to talk to people. I don't have to sit in my office. Not all the meetings have to be in my office, right? If you have a CEO that walks the hallways, that is accessible, that doesn't have to go through their admin to make an appointment, that is seen in the cafeteria, that is seen in the hallways, people start believing that, hey, you know what? Yeah, something about this place is changing. So behavior is the greatest indicator of something like that. And look, I mean, somebody once said it. The greatest way to get for leaders to get a good view of what's happening at the streets is to be at the street level, not to be at their ivory tower. You arguably cannot have a perfect view of what's happening downstairs if you're sitting on the 27th floor of your building. So it's incumbent on the leader to project the right and positive and supportive behavior. And once they start doing that, gradually the rest of the organization will start emulating them and aspiring to demonstrate the same behavior. But if you have a toxic leader, then a big chunk of their subordinates are going to try to be toxic like them, because they think that's the way for them to coexist. That makes sense.
It does. Thank you for that. And I would add that it does take time to rebuild that trust.
Absolutely.
But, being in this situation, it takes a lot of patience and trust by those leaders. Yeah. So I appreciate that. We do have one final question. And this is really the difference between incivility. There's a lot of research on incivility in the workplace and concerns that we don't really have any laws that protect employees from toxic leaders.
Right.
Basically, we're just told to deal with those type of behaviors. But could you discuss the differences between toxicity and incivility? Should HRMs work on promoting civility and then eradicate or what is your suggestion?
Yeah, to me, the delineation is, one is more serious than the other, right? So incivility has sort of a casual overtone to it, right? So yeah, I might have a call in my office and I'm very loud and I'm conscious that I'm being loud right now, and I can ignore my next door neighbors, or I can shut my door, maybe send them a message as a heads up, like, hey, my headset is not working, just please forgive me, right? That's sort of civil behavior, not necessarily toxic. Or, you know, I might play music on in my office that might be loud and somebody might perceive it as being in civil. To me, the difference is toxicity is habitual and have destructive effects. So if a person is constantly destructive, right, and it could be little things, it doesn't have to be big things. So, you know, I had a leader who was rude to everyone, right? He would always talk down to people. They would walk into the office, they don't even say good morning, or they don't greet people consistently. That's destructive behavior. That's toxic, right? So to me, incivility tends to be a little bit more casual. It might be one-off, or it might be repeated occasionally, but toxicity is more targeted, is more structured, it's intentional. The toxic leader that is walking into the building and not saying good morning or not greeting their coworkers or their team, knowing that they just passed them, is intentionally doing that. They know exactly what they're doing. So it's habitual, and it has destructive consequences. That to me is the difference between toxic behavior and all other types of behavior.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, that ties up our Q&A session. Thank you very much for an informative conversation and then Q&A session. We appreciate you being here.
Thank
I'm
you
going to
very
turn
much.
it over to Dr. Cooper here to tie us up.
Well, we first of all just want to thank you so much, Dr. Yaghi, for all that you shared. I think we've all learned something here today. I know the people who watch this later on recording are going to learn something too. So thank you so much for sharing your research and your experience with us. We also want to thank Tabitha Subal for helping us organize things today. Big thanks to Kathy Western for moderating and helping us put this session together today. As always, we thank John Kelly because his generous support has made these programs possible. So we thank him, and we thank his wife, Jennifer. And again, we want to thank you, Dr. Yaghi, for being here with us. And we're so excited that you're part of the UNT family now. So welcome. Thank you.
Look forward to meeting you guys
in person. Exactly. Yeah. And thank you to all of you who joined us today to be part of this session. We appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.